Maxwell Thorne stood at the window of his penthouse office, watching the first snowflakes of December drift past the glass. At 58, he had built an empire that stretched across Manhattan's skyline, but his greatest concern now was the young man sitting behind him, his only son, James. "This isn't a request," Maxwell said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of authority. "You will marry Sarah Collins before Christmas, or you can forget about your position in this company." James, 32, and dressed in an impeccable suit that matched his father's taste for perfection, felt his world tilting on its axis. "You can't be serious. I've never even met this woman. She's a single mother working as a waitress at that diner you frequent," Maxwell continued, turning to face his son. His steel-grey eyes held no room for argument. "I've had her thoroughly vetted. She has a 5-year-old daughter, works 2 jobs, and somehow still volunteers at a local shelter. She's exactly what this family needs." "What this family needs?" James stood up, his hands clenching into fists. "Or what you think I need. I'm not some puppet you can manipulate, Father. I run half of Thorne Enterprises now, and that's precisely the problem." Maxwell moved to his desk, picking up a thick folder. "You run it like a machine. No heart, no consideration for the human element, just profit margins and acquisitions. You're becoming everything I tried not to be." James felt a bitter laugh escape his throat. "That's rich, coming from you. The man who taught me that sentiment has no place in business. I taught you to be strong, not heartless." Maxwell's voice softened slightly. "This isn't just about business, James. It's about your future, our family's future. Sarah Collins represents everything you've forgotten: humanity, compassion, resilience. So you're forcing me to marry her? A complete stranger?" James shook his head in disbelief. "This is insane, even for you." Maxwell placed the folder on his desk with deliberate care. "You have until Christmas Eve. That's 3 weeks. Meet her, court her, convince her to marry you. If you succeed, you retain your position and eventually inherit everything I've built. If you fail—" He let the threat hang in the air. "And what makes you think she'll agree to this absurd arrangement?" James challenged. A slight smile crossed Maxwell's face. "Because I've already spoken to her. She's agreed to give you a chance, though she doesn't know about our arrangement. She thinks you're interested in dating her. And James," he paused, ensuring he had his son's full attention, "she has no idea who you really are. To her, you're just another customer from the diner. I suggest you keep it that way for now." James felt the trap closing around him. His father had planned this meticulously, leaving him no room to maneuver. Why her, of all people? Why a waitress with a child? Because she's genuine, James. In a world of social climbers and gold diggers, she's refreshingly real. But more importantly, Maxwell walked to the window, his reflection overlapping with the falling snow. "Because she reminds me of someone I once knew, someone I lost because I chose power over love." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken history. James had never heard his father speak of his past relationships, not since his mother's death 15 years ago. "You have 3 weeks, Maxwell repeated. "Make them count. And James, don't try to buy her. She's not for sale." As James left his father's office, his mind was already racing through possibilities, looking for loopholes, escape routes. But he knew his father too well. When Maxwell Thorne set his mind to something, it was as immovable as the skyscrapers he'd built. That evening, James found himself parked outside the modest diner where Sarah Collins worked. Through the window, he could see her moving between tables, a genuine smile on her face despite the late hour. She was beautiful in an understated way, long brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, movements efficient but graceful. He watched as she knelt to help a child who had dropped their crayon, her whole face lighting up as she spoke to the young customer. It was the kind of genuine warmth that couldn't be faked, the very quality his father had spoken about. As James sat there, wrestling with his father's ultimatum, he had no way of knowing that Sarah Collins carried secrets of her own, Secrets that would soon turn his father's carefully laid plans into a maze of unexpected consequences and revelations that would shake the very foundation of the Thorn Empire. Want to know what dark secret Sarah is hiding? Follow this story until the end. What she's about to reveal will change everything. Sarah Collins wiped down the counter of Eddie's diner for the 100th time that evening, her mind drifting to the strange conversation she'd had with the distinguished older gentleman a week ago. Maxwell, he'd never given his last name, had spoken about his son with such conviction, such certainty, that Sarah and he would be perfect for each other. At the time, it had seemed like a charming, if eccentric notion from a lonely father. Now, watching James sitting in her section for the third night in a row, she wasn't so sure. "Coffee?" she asked, approaching his table with a pot in hand. He looked up from his laptop and their eyes met. Despite his expensive suit and carefully maintained appearance, there was something troubled in his gaze. "Please," he replied, closing his laptop. "And maybe, would you like to join me? Your shift ends soon, doesn't it?" Sarah glanced at the clock. 10:45 p.m. Lily would be waiting at home with Mrs. Henderson, the elderly neighbor who watched her during Sarah's evening shifts. "I really shouldn't," she began. "Just 15 minutes, James pressed. "I promise not to take up too much of your time." Something in his voice made her pause. Sincerity, perhaps, or desperation, she couldn't quite tell which. "Let me check with Eddie." 5 minutes later, she slid into the booth across from James, her own cup of coffee warming her hands. "So," she said, "are we going to talk about why you've suddenly become such a regular here?" James studied her face, noting the intelligence in her eyes, the subtle wariness in her expression. His father's words echoed in his mind. "Don't try to buy her. I find myself drawn here," he said carefully. "To you, if I'm being honest." Sarah's laugh was soft but pointed. "Right. The waitress and the businessman. Tale as old as time. You don't believe me? I believe you're interested," she replied, stirring her coffee. "What I don't believe is that you're being completely honest about why." James felt his chest tighten. Did she know? Had his father revealed more than he'd admitted? "What makes you say that?" "Experience," Sarah said simply. "Life has taught me that when something seems too good to be true, it usually is." She leaned forward slightly. "So why don't we skip the games? What do you really want?" The directness of her question caught James off guard. In his world of corporate negotiations and carefully worded contracts, such bluntness was rare. He found himself responding with unexpected honesty. "Would you believe me if I said I'm trying to save my life as I know it?" Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Now that sounds more like the truth, though I suspect there's more to it." Before James could respond, his phone buzzed. A message from his father. "How's it going with Sarah? Time is ticking." "Son, everything okay?" Sarah asked, noting his darkened expression. "Just business," he lied, pocketing the phone. "Sarah, would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? A real dinner, not just coffee in a booth." She hesitated, and he could see the internal debate playing across her face. "I'd have to find someone to watch Lily." "Bring her," James said quickly, surprising himself with how much he meant it. "I'd like to meet her." Sarah's eyes narrowed slightly. "You know about Lily?" "How?" James realized his mistake too late. He scrambled for an explanation, but Sarah was already standing, her coffee forgotten. "Let me guess," she said, her voice tight. "A distinguished older gentleman told you about her? Maxwell, right?" "Sarah, wait!" "No," she cut him off. "I don't know what kind of game you and your father are playing, but I'm not interested in being a pawn. I have a daughter to think about." As she turned to leave, James caught her wrist gently. "Please," he said softly. "You're right. There's more to this story. But it's not what you think. Let me explain everything. Tomorrow night, you and Lily, both." Sarah looked down at his hand on her wrist, then back to his face. Something in his expression, desperation perhaps, or genuine regret, made her pause. "Fine," she said finally, "but this is your one chance to be honest with me. After that, if I don't like what I hear, we're done." "Thank you," James breathed. "I'll pick you both up at 7. Sarah shook her head. "We'll meet you there. Text me the address. She pulled her hand free and walked away, leaving James alone with his cooling coffee and the weight of tomorrow's confession. What he didn't see was Sarah's hands shaking as she returned to the kitchen, or the way she pulled out her own phone and stared at a years-old text message that she'd never had the courage to delete. I know what you did, Sarah Collins. The truth always comes out eventually. Later that night, after relieving Mrs. Henderson and checking on a sleeping Lily, Sarah sat on her small apartment's fire escape, watching the city lights flicker. She pulled out an old photograph, creased and worn from frequent handling. In it, a younger version of herself stood beside a man whose face had been carefully cut out. "What would you think of me now, Thomas?" she whispered to the night air. "Your precious little secret is about to become a lot more complicated." Meanwhile, across town in his luxury apartment, James was doing his own research. His laptop screen glowed with various searches about Sarah Collins, but something wasn't adding up. Her history seemed to start abruptly 5 years ago, right around the time Lily was born. Before that, there was nothing, as if Sarah Collins hadn't existed. His phone buzzed again, another message from his father. "Remember, son, 3 weeks until Christmas. Make them count." James closed his laptop and walked to his window, staring out at the same city Sarah was watching. Two people, two very different lives, both carrying secrets that threatened to unravel everything. And somewhere in the city, Maxwell Thorne sat in his study, looking at an old photograph of his own, one that would explain everything and nothing about why he'd chosen Sarah Collins for his son. Does Sarah's mysterious past hold a secret that could destroy the Thorne empire? Drop a if you think James is falling for her despite everything. The restaurant James had chosen for their dinner was elegant without being ostentatious. Le Petit Jardin, a small French bistro tucked away in a quieter part of the city. He arrived early, his stomach in knots, and watched through the window as Sarah and Lily approached. The little girl wore a blue dress that had clearly been carefully pressed for the occasion, her dark hair in neat braids. She clutched her mother's hand, looking around with wide-eyed wonder at the twinkling lights that decorated the restaurant's exterior. Sarah had dressed simply but beautifully in a burgundy sweater dress that spoke of careful budgeting rather than designer labels. The sight of them together, mother and daughter against the world, made something twist in James's chest. "Mr. James!" Lily called out as they entered, surprising both adults. "You're the nice man who always leaves big tips for Mommy." Sarah's cheeks colored slightly as James stood to greet them. "Lily," she admonished gently, "remember what we talked about?" Inside voice. Lily nodded seriously. "Sorry, Mommy." James pulled out chairs for both of them, trying to hide his amusement. "It's perfectly all right. And you must be Miss Lily. Your mother's told me a lot about you." "No, she hasn't," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Mommy never talks about you except to say you're persistent," Sarah supplied, unfolding her napkin with perhaps more attention than it deserved. "Lily, sweetheart, why don't you look at your menu? They have chocolate mousse for dessert." As Lily became absorbed in the children's menu, James caught Sarah's eye. "Persistent, huh?" "Among other things," she replied quietly. "You promised me honesty tonight, James. I'm still waiting." He nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right, but first let's order. Some conversations are better had over good food." The waiter appeared and James helped Lily navigate the menu, showing a natural ease with children that surprised Sarah. He didn't talk down to the 5-year-old, instead explaining dishes in ways she could understand and listening seriously to her questions. When Lily announced she wanted escargot simply because she liked how the word sounded, James gently steered her toward the chicken without making her feel foolish. As they waited for their food, Lily pulled out a small sketchbook and crayons from her little purse, clearly a compromise Sarah had made to ensure good behavior during the dinner. The girl became absorbed in her drawing, allowing the adults to talk. "So," Sarah said softly, "let's start with the basics. Who are you really, James?" He met her gaze steadily. "My full name is James Thorne. My father is Maxwell Thorne, CEO of Thorne Enterprises. Sarah's face remained carefully neutral, but her fingers tightened around her water glass. The real estate development company? Among other things, James echoed her earlier words. We're primarily in urban development now, but we started in real estate, yes. And your father, the kind older gentleman who spoke to me about his son, he's worth what? Billions? James nodded slowly. Sarah, I know how this looks. Do you? She interrupted, keeping her voice low for Lily's sake, because from where I'm sitting it looks like an elaborate setup. A wealthy father and son targeting a single mother waitress for... What exactly? What's the end game here? James? Before he could answer, their appetizers arrived. James watched as Sarah helped Lily with her soup, noting the practiced way she tucked a napkin into the girl's collar to protect her dress. There was such care in every movement, such devotion. My father, James began once the waiter had left, the waiter has given me an ultimatum. He believes I've lost touch with reality, that I've become too focused on profit margins and bottom lines. He's threatening to remove me from my position in the company unless what? James closed his eyes briefly. Unless I marry someone who can, in his words, teach me humanity again. He chose you. Sarah set down her spoon very carefully. And when exactly were you planning to tell me about this arrangement? I'm telling you now, James said. Look, I know how crazy this sounds. Crazy doesn't begin to cover it, Sarah cut in. Your father chose me. Like I'm some sort of rehabilitation program for rich men who've lost their way. And you went along with this? I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, James. Sarah's voice was steel wrapped in silk. Always. Lily looked up from her drawing. Mommy, are you mad? Sarah's expression softened instantly. No, sweetheart. Mr. James and I are just having a grown-up discussion. Show me what you're drawing. Lily held up her sketchbook proudly. It's us. See? There's you and me and Mr. James and the nice old man from the diner who gave me candy. James felt his blood run cold. The old man? You've met my father. Sarah's expression matched his concern. Lily, honey, when did you meet this man? At the park last week, Lily said cheerfully, returning to her drawing. He said he knew you from the diner, Mommy. He showed me pictures of his family and said we could be part of it too. Sarah's face had gone pale. Excuse us for a moment, she said to James, standing and taking Lily's hand. We need to visit the ladies' room. James watched them go, his mind racing. His father had approached Lily without telling him. What else had Maxwell done that he didn't know about? His phone buzzed. Speak of the devil. A text from his father. How's dinner going? Son, remember the clock is ticking. James was about to respond when he noticed Sarah's purse left behind in her haste to take Lily to the bathroom. As he reached to move it away from the edge of the table, a photograph slipped out. He knew he shouldn't look, knew it was an invasion of privacy. But something about the worn edges of the photo, the careful way it had been folded and refolded, drew his attention. The photograph showed a younger Sarah, perhaps 5 or 6 years ago, standing next to a man whose face had been cut out. They were in front of a building James recognized instantly, Thorne Enterprises' old headquarters. But it was the writing on the back that made his heart stop. Sarah and Thomas, Company Picnic 2018. The last time we were all together. Thomas. James knew that name. Thomas Hayes had been his father's right-hand man, the company's CFO, until his mysterious disappearance 5 years ago. The investigation had gone cold. But the scandal had nearly destroyed Thorne Enterprises 5 years ago, right around the time Lily was born. Right around the time Sarah Collins seemed to appear out of nowhere. James heard the bathroom door open and quickly slipped the photo back into Sarah's purse. When she returned with Lily, her composure had been restored, but there was a new wariness in her eyes. I think it's time we went home, she said quietly. Lily's getting tired. But, Mommy, what about the chocolate mousse? Lily protested, even as she tried to stifle a yawn. Another time, sweetheart. Sarah gathered their things, careful not to meet James's eyes. Thank you for dinner, James. I need some time to think about everything you've told me. Sarah, wait. James stood, his mind still reeling from his discovery. There's something else we need to discuss. Not tonight, she said firmly. Not in front of Lily. As they left the restaurant, James watched them go, the pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed starting to fall into place. His father's insistence on Sarah, the urgency of the timeline, the mysterious gaps in Sarah's history, it all connected to Thomas Hayes somehow. But how? And more importantly, what had really happened 5 years ago? Back in his study, Maxwell Thorne held another copy of the same photograph James had discovered, this one with Thomas Hayes's face intact. He stared at it for a long moment before opening his safe and pulling out a thick file labeled Hayes Investigation Confidential. Soon, he whispered to himself, touching the photo gently. Soon, everything will come to light. Who was Thomas Hayes really? Comment truth if you think Maxwell is hiding something bigger than we could imagine. The next morning, James sat in his office at Thorne Enterprises, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. He'd spent most of the night researching everything he could find about Thomas Hayes and the events of 5 years ago. The pieces were there, but they didn't form a complete picture. Hayes had vanished without a trace in December 2018, leaving behind a mystery that had haunted the company for years. There had been rumors of embezzlement, of corporate espionage, but nothing was ever proven. The police investigation had gone cold, and eventually the story faded from the headlines. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, quickly minimizing his browser windows. Maxwell Thorne entered, impeccable as always in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Son," he said, closing the door behind him. "I trust dinner went well last night?" James studied his father's face, looking for any sign that might reveal his true motives. "You approached Lily at the park," he said, keeping his voice level. "You didn't think that was something worth mentioning." Maxwell's expression didn't change. "I needed to be sure she was the right choice. For both of you." "The right choice?" James stood, anger finally breaking through his careful control. "Or the right pawn in whatever game you're playing." "I found the photograph, Father. Sarah with Thomas Hayes." For the first time in James's memory, Maxwell Thorne looked genuinely surprised. "You've seen it?" "It fell out of her purse. What I can't figure out is why you're so invested in this woman. What's her connection to Hayes, and why now after 5 years? Maxwell moved to the window, his reflection overlaying the city skyline. "What do you remember about Thomas Hayes, James?" "He was your CFO, your friend. He disappeared 5 years ago under suspicious circumstances." "He was more than that," Maxwell said quietly. "Thomas was like a brother to me. We built this company together, from nothing. He was brilliant, ethical, compassionate, everything I wanted you to become." James felt the sting of those words, but pressed on. "And Sarah, what was she to him?" Maxwell turned back to face his son. "That's not my story to tell, but I will say this. Thomas Hayes's disappearance wasn't what everyone thinks. And Sarah Collins, she holds the key to everything. Is that why you're forcing this marriage, to get to Sarah?" "I'm forcing nothing," Maxwell corrected. "I'm giving you an opportunity to grow, to become the man I know you can be. That Sarah's connection to Thomas makes this situation more complex is merely a factor I had to consider." Before James could respond, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "We need to talk, alone. Meet me at the Central Park Carousel at 2 p.m. "Something important?" Maxwell asked, noting his son's expression. "Just business," James lied, pocketing the phone. "If you'll excuse me, Father, I have meetings to prepare for." Maxwell nodded and moved to leave, but paused at the door. "James, be careful. The truth isn't always what we think it is." At exactly 2 p.m., James found Sarah waiting by the carousel. She wore a worn peacoat against the December chill, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful, but there was a tension in her stance that hadn't been there before. "Thank you for coming," she said as he approached. "Lily's at school, we can talk freely." "Sarah, about last night." "You saw the photograph," she interrupted. "I know you did." I saw you put it back in my purse. James didn't deny it. Who was Thomas Hayes to you, Sarah? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's the question, isn't it? The one everyone wanted answered 5 years ago. She started walking, and James fell into step beside her. Thomas Hayes was my mentor at Thorn Enterprises. I was a junior accountant fresh out of college. He took me under his wing, taught me everything he knew. You worked for the company. James stopped walking, stunned. But there's no record, because it was all erased, Sarah said simply. Every trace of my employment, every document, every email. When Thomas disappeared, I became a ghost too. Had to become one for Lily's sake. What really happened, Sarah? She was quiet for a long moment, watching children play on the nearby playground. Thomas discovered something, she finally said. Irregularities in the company's books, money being moved through shell corporations, millions of dollars vanishing and reappearing in offshore accounts. He brought it to me because he trusted me, wanted a second pair of eyes to verify his findings. James felt his chest tighten. What did you find? Evidence of massive fraud. Someone at the highest levels of Thorn Enterprises was embezzling funds, using the company to launder money for some very dangerous people. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes hard. Thomas was going to expose everything. He had all the documentation, all the proof. The night before he disappeared, he gave me a copy of everything. Where is it now? Safe, she said simply. Insurance, in case anything happened to me or Lily. Thomas wasn't just my mentor, James. He was Lily's father. The revelation hit James like a physical blow. Does my father know? I don't know what your father knows, Sarah replied. But I do know that the night Thomas disappeared, he was supposed to meet with Maxwell Thorn. He never came home. She pulled out her phone and showed James the text message she'd been keeping all these years. I know what you did, Sarah Collins. The truth always comes out eventually. The next day, I discovered I was pregnant. When I tried to access my work email, my credentials had been revoked. My entire employment history with Thorn Enterprises had vanished. I got the message loud and clear, disappear or else. So I did. I became Sarah Collins, waitress and single mother, living a quiet life far from the corporate world. Until my father found you, James said, the pieces finally clicking into place. Yes, and now here we are with you under orders to marry me before Christmas. Sarah's laugh was bitter. Tell me, James, did your father mention why the timeline was so specific? Why it had to be before Christmas? James shook his head. Because on December 26th, the statute of limitations runs out on certain financial crimes from 5 years ago. After that, no one can be prosecuted no matter what evidence comes to light. Sarah's eyes were fierce now. Your father didn't choose me to teach you humanity, James. He chose me because he's running out of time to bury the truth. James felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. You think my father was behind Thomas's disappearance? That he was involved in the fraud? I don't know, Sarah admitted. That's what scares me. Thomas trusted Maxwell Thorn completely. He was going to that meeting to show him the evidence, to get his help in exposing the corruption. Either your father was involved or someone else got to Thomas first, James finished. Someone who knew he was about to expose everything. Exactly. And now your father's sudden interest in arranging this marriage, it can't be a coincidence. He's either trying to silence me or protect you, James said slowly, remembering his father's words. The truth isn't always what we think it is. Sarah's phone buzzed, a text from Lily's school. Her face went pale. No, she whispered. No. What is it? What's wrong? Lily's gone. Sarah's voice shook. Someone picked her up from school claiming to be her grandfather. They had all the proper documentation. James was already pulling out his phone. My father. Call him, Sarah demanded. Call him right now. But Maxwell wasn't answering his phone, and when James's assistant finally got through to his father's office, the news was worse. Maxwell Thorn had cleared his schedule for the afternoon and left the office shortly after his meeting with James. He has my daughter. Sarah's voice was deadly calm now. Your father has my little girl. We don't know that for sure, James began, but Sarah cut him off. No more games, James. No more manipulation. You have 1 hour to find out where your father took my daughter, or I'm taking everything I know to the press. Every document, every piece of evidence Thomas gave me. I'll burn Thorn Enterprises to the ground if I have to." As if on cue, both their phones buzzed simultaneously. A message from Maxwell Thorn. "Time for the truth to come out. Come to the old Hayes estate. All of it ends where it began. Lily is safe, but hurry. Some stories need all their players for the final act." Is Maxwell protecting Sarah or setting her up? Why did he really take Lily? Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss the shocking finale. The Hayes estate sat on the outskirts of the city, a sprawling Victorian mansion that had seen better days. As James's car crunched up the gravel driveway, Sarah stared at the looming structure with a mixture of fear and recognition. "I never thought I'd come back here," she whispered. "Thomas loved this place, said he'd restore it someday, make it a home again." James parked in front of the main entrance, noting the only other vehicle present, his father's distinctive black Mercedes. "Sarah," he said quietly, "whatever we find in there, I'm on your side. You know that, right?" She turned to look at him, really look at him, for the first time since their world had exploded. "Why?" "Your father's reputation, your inheritance, your whole life. It's all at risk because of me." "Because you showed me something I'd forgotten," he replied. "That there are things more important than money and power. The way you love Lily, the way you've fought to protect her. That's real. That's what matters." A ghost of a smile crossed Sarah's face. "Looks like your father got his wish after all. You did learn something about humanity." The front door was unlocked. They entered the mansion's grand foyer, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. A child's laugh rang out from somewhere above, followed by Maxwell Thorn's distinctive voice. "In here!" They followed the sounds to the mansion's library, a vast room lined with dusty bookshelves. Maxwell sat in a leather armchair, watching Lily as she explored the room with childlike wonder. The little girl's face lit up when she saw them. "Mommy, Mr. James, look what Grandpa Max showed me." She held up an old photograph album. "There are pictures of my daddy in here." Sarah rushed forward, gathering Lily in her arms. "Are you okay, baby? Did he hurt you?" "I'm fine, Mommy. Grandpa Max told me stories about Daddy. He said Daddy was his best friend." Maxwell stood slowly, his usual commanding presence somehow diminished in the fading afternoon light. "She deserved to know about her father, Sarah. They both did." He gestured to James. "Son, there's something you need to see." He moved to an old desk in the corner, pulling out a thick file and a laptop. 5 years ago, he began, Thomas Hayes discovered something that would destroy not just Thorn Enterprises, but dozens of other companies. A massive money laundering operation run through our corporation without my knowledge." "Without your knowledge," James interrupted. "You expect us to believe that?" "Yes," Maxwell said simply, "because Thomas came to me with the evidence. We were going to expose everything together, but someone knew we were close to revealing the truth. The night Thomas disappeared, we were supposed to meet here at his home. When I arrived, I found this." He opened the laptop, pulling up a video file. Security camera footage from the mansion's driveway showed Thomas Hayes arriving, then being confronted by 3 men. There was a struggle, a flash of metal in the darkness. Sarah turned away, unable to watch. "Stop," she pleaded. "Just stop." Maxwell closed the laptop. "By the time I arrived, they were gone. There was blood on the gravel, signs of a struggle, but no body was ever found. I've spent the last 5 years trying to uncover who was behind it all." "Why didn't you come to the police?" James demanded. "Because the corruption went deeper than we knew. The men who took Thomas, they were federal agents, corrupt ones, working for whoever was running the money laundering operation. If I'd gone public, if I'd exposed what I knew, they would have come after everyone connected to Thomas, including his pregnant girlfriend, who had copies of all the evidence." Sarah's arms tightened around Lily. "You knew? All this time you knew about me?" Maxwell nodded. "Thomas told me everything. He was so excited about becoming a father, about the life you were going to build together. When he disappeared, I made sure all traces of your connection to Thorn Enterprises were erased. I couldn't protect Thomas, but I could protect you and his child. But why now? James asked. Why this elaborate scheme with the marriage ultimatum? Because I finally have enough evidence to expose everyone involved, Maxwell replied. The corrupt agents, the executives who were part of the scheme, all of it. But I needed Sarah's evidence too, the documents Thomas gave her. And I needed to know she could trust us before I made my move. Trust you? Sarah laughed bitterly. You manipulated your son, kidnapped my daughter, all to get to some documents? No, Maxwell said quietly. I did it to bring our family back together. Thomas was more than my friend Sarah. He was my son. The revelation landed like a thunderbolt. James stared at his father in shock. What? It was a youthful indiscretion, Maxwell explained. I had a relationship long before I met your mother, James. It resulted in a child, Thomas. His mother raised him, but I stayed involved in his life. When he was old enough, I brought him into the company, helped him rise on his own merits. Only a handful of people ever knew the truth. That's why you were so invested in finding out what happened to him, James said slowly. He wasn't just your CFO or your friend. He was my brother, yes, and Lily. Maxwell looked at the little girl with tears in his eyes. Is my granddaughter, my only grandchild. I couldn't protect her father, but I can protect her now. We can protect her together as a family. Sarah stood, still holding Lily close. And what exactly are you planning to do with this evidence? Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the FBI's Internal Affairs Division and the Securities and Exchange Commission. Everything comes out. The money laundering, the corrupt agents, all of it. I have enough evidence to ensure it sticks this time, especially with your documents to back it up. And the marriage ultimatum? James asked. Was that all just a ploy? Maxwell smiled sadly. No, son. That part was real. Part was... You needed Sarah in your life, even if you didn't know why. You needed to learn what Thomas knew, that true wealth isn't measured in dollars and cents, but in the love we share and the people we protect. He turned to Sarah. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to let us help protect Lily, to let her know her family, all of her family. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, looking down at her daughter. Lily had fallen asleep in her arms, exhausted from the day's excitement. Finally, she spoke. I won't let you use my daughter as a pawn, Maxwell. If we do this, we do it as equals. No more manipulation, no more secrets. Agreed, Maxwell nodded. Tomorrow everything comes to light. Whatever happens after that, we face it together. James moved to stand beside Sarah, gently touching her shoulder. We don't have to decide everything now, but I meant what I said earlier. I'm on your side, whatever you choose. Sarah looked up at him, seeing not the corporate executive she'd first met, but a man who had chosen truth over power, love over money. I think, she said slowly, that your father might have been right about one thing. Maybe we did need each other. As the sun set outside the Hayes estate, casting long shadows through the library windows, 4 people bound by secrets, lies, and ultimately love began the slow process of becoming a family. Not through ultimatums or arranged marriages, but through choice and understanding. The next morning, as promised, Maxwell Thorne walked into the FBI headquarters with a file of evidence that would shake the corporate world to its core. But he didn't walk in alone. James was there, standing tall beside his father. And Sarah was there too, holding Lily's hand, ready to share the truth she'd protected for 5 years. The scandal that followed would indeed rock Thorn Enterprises, but not destroy it. Instead, under James and Sarah's joint leadership, it emerged stronger, more ethical, more human. The company Thomas Hayes had given his life to protect finally became worthy of his sacrifice. As for James and Sarah, they did eventually marry, not because of an ultimatum, but because love has a way of growing in the most unexpected places. Their wedding was small, intimate, held in the restored gardens of the Hayes estate. Lily, radiant in her flower girl dress, walked down the aisle scattering rose petals, while Maxwell watched with tears in his eyes, knowing that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting the truth set you free. And in a quiet corner of the Hayes estate's library, a new photograph took its place beside the old ones, a family portrait of 4 generations of Thorns, united not by blood alone, but by the choices they made and the truths they chose to face together. Did this story touch your heart? Let us know in the comments. What would you have done in James's position when his father gave him that ultimatum? Do you think a relationship built on secrets can truly lead to real love? If this journey of love, family secrets, and redemption moved you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps our channel alive, allowing us to bring you powerful emotional stories every single day. Looking for another gripping story that will keep you on the edge of your seat? Check out the video on your left, a tale of unexpected twists and emotional revelations that will captivate you just as much. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. Remember, every subscription helps us continue sharing these touching stories that remind us what truly matters in life. See you in our next video.